All right. So welcome to Friday, GrrCON. I'm Shane Harsch, Senior Solution Principal at RSA, and that's a big fancy title for consultant at large and just general annoyance to the sales team. My role is really to help people understand the challenges that are in the marketplace today, the challenges that are in the world, what's happening, the attack surface, everything that they've got to deal with, and help them to process and align, of course, with what RSA does. But the interesting thing about what RSA does now is that we're really moving into that trusted advisor, security program management, development type role. And that's very different from, well, how many tokens do you want to buy? How much encryption do you need, right? Certainly we still do that, but when you look at what's happening in the world today, when you look at what's happened to us historically, right, there are a lot of things that we've learned and discovered along that journey, and that we really want to help everyone out in the world with facing those challenges. One of the biggest changes that we've realized is what's changed in security operations and security program management overall, right? What are the challenges that you're facing, and how is it that we can best help you adapt to the world? And we call that intelligence-driven security. So regardless of whether you're looking at this from what RSA products you could buy, that's not what this is about. This is about changing your perspective on how your security operations are running now and why that change has to occur. Whether you partner with us or you partner with someone else, it doesn't matter. The change has to occur, and we can't keep doing the same things that we've been doing for the last 20 years and expect success. That is insanity, right? So that's how we have to move it forward. So hopefully that's the takeaway you get from today. This is nothing new, right? These are conversations that you're having all the time. The sophistication piece is one of my favorite pieces, because a lot of people assume that when we talk about sophistication, that what we're talking about is, oh, they've got some new code base, they've got some new zero-day exploit. And the answer is no, not really. Right? The exploits that we're seeing that get introduced out in the environment are relatively straightforward. They're doing the same types of things that they've been doing the last 20 years. What the sophistication speaks to is how smart they are about how they deploy that attack. How much they know about your environment when they go into it, right? How much they know about what targets to hit within your environment. And that's what we saw firsthand during our breach experience. We were completely blown away at how much they knew about the internal structure of our network, right? And the path they wanted to take to get to their target, which they never achieved. But nonetheless, they knew where they were going, and that was an incredibly big surprise. And we estimate, and working with the FBI and our partners, we estimate that they were probably profiling the organization for over a year, right? And that's the type of sophistication that we're talking about. It's that patience, it's that deliberation. It's not just a random lash out, ooh, let's go hack this site. It's knowing what they're going to do about it. And this is really the challenges that we're facing, is that we realize that security teams are missing attacks. Or, when we look at certain high profile situations, they have fantastic teams and fantastic technology, and it's a process that fails, right? And the process in that situation, when we're talking about a company like a large retailer located in Minnesota, that the process failed because of prioritization of business operations, right? We believe that we can't sustain any downtime in the conduct of our operations. Therefore, we're not going to pursue this indicator of compromise. Well, it turns out that was a bad choice, right? But it wasn't that it wasn't detected. It wasn't that they didn't have the right team in place, right? We had a failure of process. Well, now that failure of process would get the recognition that it should, that, well, the next time this happens, yeah, we will possibly impact our business operation, but it's not going to cost us as much as the potentiality could, right? And we recognize that and we're willing to accept that. It becomes a risk management conversation. And ultimately, that's all we want to have happen in security operations, is to be able to have that risk management conversation, to have the confidence in our metrics, the confidence in our data, the confidence in our process, to continue that conversation from a position of strength and an informed position. It's not slowing down, right? We're seeing a lot more activity than we've seen in previous years. And still, this is the biggest challenge, is dwell time. We're giving the bad guys too much time in our environments, that by the time that we detect them, it's too late. They've already gotten their pay data and they've moved on. And you're just trying to pick up the pieces to understand what was stolen, right? So you can make a good accounting to your board. But the reality is that's not going to work, right? We need to rethink our approach to security operations in a way that we put the systems and the processes in place that allow us to limit that, to respond with less time than the amount of dwell time that they need to capitalize on their breach. So that basically means you get about a day or two to detect, validate, and remediate any incident that you identify. And that's not a lot of time. It's not a lot of time at all. Point of sale intrusions. Nobody can detect them, not reliably. And so we're always looking at external parties coming up and identifying them. And it shouldn't be that way. It should absolutely not be that way. And unfortunately, the trend lines really aren't working in our favor. We continue, year over year, continue to see the lack of response time in the majority of the organizations that have been breached. And I think part of it is because security is often thought of as a cost, right? As a cost center. It's not a profit center, it's a cost center. And so we want to minimize that as much as possible. Yes, that's true. However, it's a lot more like your personal health. It's a lot more like talking about healthcare. There are lots of things that we don't want to have to pay for, but yet none of us really wants to die, and therefore we have to consider these choices in that context. And yes, businesses don't die, but businesses can cease to operate. And it's very much that same conversation. If you make widget X and all of your intellectual property is stolen, and now widget X is made for 1/10 of the cost that you can make it and introduced to the marketplace, that will kill your business. And I've seen firsthand in the positions that I've occupied in the industry, where I sit down and have a conversation with the legal and operational leadership of the organization to say, look, we know you spent $4 million supporting warranty repairs on parts that you did not make. So your lack of information security for that intellectual property has a tangible cost. We're not even talking about brand impact or anything like that. Has a tangible cost of $4 million. So now let's start to work through that conversation. Unfortunately, that conversation was not well received, and I don't work there anymore. And it's very much a head in the sand type of mentality. And that's really what we got to try and get past. A lot of what we do, and you guys all know this, a lot of what we do isn't really expensive. Sure, there's, great, awesome technology out there, and my company and my parent company would be more than happy to sell you a truckload of equipment. But at the end of the day, it's about the people understanding what to do with the information that they have. And it's the processes around how they do their job that matters most. And this is essentially what we have to do. We have to be in this constant state of, we've got our corporate Fitbit on, right? And we're tracking constantly, testing constantly, always aware of what the state of our current operational health is. And when something is aberrant, then we look into it and say, is this significant enough that I need to take action? What are the criteria for me to take action against this incident? Is it noteworthy or not, right? And so establishing that rigor around how we deal with that. We're missing attacks. There's a lot of things that are happening that your traditional controls cannot perceive, process, and alert on. Yet we all know that things are happening out there. So that's a point that we've got to address in our operation. Your standard blocking and tackling technologies, your firewalls, your IPS, they're absolutely essential. I would never propose building a building without doors that lock. But at the same time, just because you have locked doors on your building doesn't mean someone can't get in and steal stuff. And this goes beyond a defense in-depth conversation. It's what is the role of all the technologies that you have in your environment? Efficiency. While it's great that we can log into a server, run TCP dump, get all that data, pull it over to our desktop, open it up in Wireshark, start pouring through it, open up our SIM, try to correlate that with the logs. All of those steps take time. And the unfortunate thing is when you take that time and realize, oh, I'm barking up the wrong tree. It wasn't that server, I should have been looking at that server. Or it wasn't that port on the core switch, it was this other port that I really needed to be capturing on. Right? Not to mention the fact that if you're capturing after the fact, that's only going to work if the compromise continues. Right? That's not necessarily going to help you if the compromise occurred 2 weeks ago. So we have to make it possible for your analysts to operate in a more efficient and timely manner. And SIM isn't enough. Your traditional log collection analysis is simply not enough. That is a forensic operation, and to a certain extent, it's only going to validate the impact that caused you to recognize the breach in the first place. Right? You need to become hunters. I would classify traditional security operations as blocking and tackling. Right? We put up as many walls as we can. We look at all of the windows that we've left open, and we try to block anything that matches known badness. But that's about it. That's about the extent of traditional security operations. And unfortunately, that's not giving us the visibility that we need. It still leaves you as prey. You do not take on the predator role in that type of a situation. In order to be a predator, you have to be looking at things as they're happening now and always. Right? The wolf that moves up next to the pond hoping for deer to come up and drink is going to sit there for hours and hours looking at nothing until that opportunity arrives and sees that prey move into position. Right? But we can't spend all of our time looking at nothing. That would be completely inefficient. So something's got to give in how all that fits together. And it's really this intersection of visibility, analysis, and action, right? We need to maximize the amount of visibility that you have into your environment. We need to understand what actions are going to result from the things that you observe. And we need to understand how that analysis comes together. How do we bridge from visibility through to action? What are the criteria for us to take action? And right now, what we're seeing firsthand with our customers, and I'm sure possibly what you're experiencing, when you look at budgets associated with information security, this is a pretty fair representation of what we see. We got 80% on prevention, 15% on monitoring, and 5% on response. Your incident response plan might be a 2-page document that says, well, Alice is going to take point and is going to call everybody on the senior leadership and tell them what she's doing when something bad happens. Right? That oftentimes is the extent of the incident response plan. That does not align with what we're seeing in terms of the attacker space. Right? If all these breaches are occurring and all of this preventative technology isn't stopping it, then why are we spending all this money on the preventative technology if it's not going to work? And when you look at the RSA breach, which is a poster child example of how this can go bad, we've got 2-factor authentication on getting into our environment around the world. Right? We do password rotation every 30 days. We do security awareness training to make sure that everyone's aware of what the current challenges are. And we're a security company, right? But when you look at our breach and the 1,000 phishing emails that went out, 17 individuals clicked on the attachment in the email and 2 people executed it. So if we, understanding our role in the industry and the employees that work there, we've got some pretty security savvy, just general employees, accountants, everything like that understand the stakes. And yet, we still had that happen. Once they're inside, the wonderful password hash replay, boom, 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 just moving laterally through the organization, moving towards the targets. All of our preventative technology did nothing, right? McAfee didn't help us, right? It was a 0-day exploit, so there was no signature for it. So it really causes us to think, are we spending our money on the right things? And this is fundamentally what we're proposing, is that you look at your budget and you think really hard about what those tools are doing. You know, a classic red flag is, well, yeah, we've got an awesome IPS that we only have in detection mode. Okay. So then what's that doing for you, right? It's generating a whole bunch of alerts that you don't have time to do anything about, right? So think about where your money's being spent and understanding that you will be breached. You will be compromised. So you have to have a plan for how you respond to that in an orderly fashion. And that plan cannot stop with the security organization, right? It's got to go across into HR, into operations, into your business leadership, and it has to be a plan that everyone agrees upon. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be lengthy. You don't have to have a 3-ring binder filled with 400 pages of response actions. But it has to be comprehensive, and it has to be reasonable to fit with your business risk profile. And that's going to take time, and that's going to take some expertise. But you also have to think about, well, what can we do to improve our visibility, right? In taking a classic RSA breach as an example, what could we do so that we could have detected that was happening right when it did? The minute that Excel file was executed and started doing weird things to that machine and to the environment, how could we have known? Because pretty much any other attack that we're going to see is going to follow that pattern, right? It's going to end up leveraging credentialed access, generally using the environment in the way it was intended, doing network access to different machines. But we're going to see some aberrant behavior out of that, and certainly we're going to see some aberrant behavior in the memory of the compromised machines, right? So how can we improve our visibility? And that's where we see there's a 4-point data collection that absolutely has to occur. Full packets, full logs, endpoint disposition, and I'm not talking about virus, and net flow. Because we recognize collecting every packet that flows over your network is probably a lot of noise. But when you look at your zones of trust, and when you look at the architecture of your organization, your ingress, egress points, right? There are very key points where you know that if there's a compromise, that data is going to flow along that path. And that's where you need to collect full packets. You want net flow from your extended operation so you understand any vector or any transition of the session that was started coming through any of those points. And you need to understand what's happening on the endpoint at all times. That then goes into some system that we get some capture time data enrichment, right? That is informed by asset information, business risk information, what's on the target, how valuable is it, how critical is it to our organization that that data not be compromised? Because certainly that should change the priority of what's happening. Once all that data is put together, then we need to run some analysis on it. But that analysis cannot be manual, right? It has to be automated. There have to be some heuristics that you set up that are going to allow you to essentially separate the hay from the needles, so that you can focus only on those events that might potentially be incidents, and to get that number down to a manageable level. And the more information that you put into the system, from firewalls, from IPSs, from DLP, from server logs, all right? The more information that you put into the system, the more intelligent and the more refined the results should be. Now that all of that noise is out of the way, now that we're left with a pile of needles, we have to decide which one of those needles is the sharpest and which ones we don't care about. So at RSA, our Critical Incident Response Center, which is headquartered in Bedford, Massachusetts, is the Critical Incident Response Center for RSA as well as the entire EMC Federation. Which, go figure, RSA is the security arm of EMC, so of course that's what we do. We process 65 million events from security devices per hour. So this is coming in from our DLP environment, it's coming in from our IPS environment, firewalls, everything. 65 million events per hour. With this approach, with this methodology and the technology that we employ, that distills down to 90 incidents per day. Right, mapped to high, medium, and low risk categories as informed by our business risk context. And that means with a staff of 14 individuals, we can provide 24/7 incident response to our entire global organization. And if we see an increase in the number of incidents, as is output by our automated analytics, at that point we have a risk management conversation. Right? Now, if we're starting to see a trend of 100, 110 incidents per day, overtime isn't going to cut it anymore. So it becomes do we assume more risk and tune our environment, or do we hire more bodies? Because we know how many FTEs map to the number of incidents that we want to manage to. Pure management conversation, completely supported by metrics. It's no longer well, my gosh, we're overwhelmed, we don't know what to do, right? We've got solid data. So it scales. If suddenly we're dealing with 100 million events per hour instead of 65 million, well, we know that that's going to cause a requisite change in our staffing model. And that last bit there, integrating SOC best practices. It doesn't really matter what your run book looks like, as long as it's comprehensive and as long as it achieves your objectives. The biggest challenge with your run book, of course, is making sure that everyone is adhering to it every step of the way. So in our belief, that means that that run book has to be integrated into the tool, whatever that tool is, and helps that analyst, not forces them, but enables them to follow it completely. And that also leaves behind a nice track record of what was done, so that when it escalates to a different role, that person can pick it up and know that everything that should have been done has been done. And that's a critical piece. And it has to be modular. I think it would be extremely arrogant of us as a company if we were to come to you and say, you know what, we can help you rebuild your security management program, but you're going to have to get rid of all the technology and tools that you already have, right? I think you would be right to pretty much throw us out if that were to happen, because it's an unreasonable position. So we have to understand how we can work with this modularly, understanding gaps, you know, that might exist in those tools, and coming up with compensating controls for them from a process perspective. And the shift is to this concept of risk-based data collection. That we need our basic view of the environment, what has happened. We need the deep view of the environment, what is happening right this moment, completely. Because everything happens over the network. If you capture all of the packets, you should be able to figure out what is happening. We need to be able to go wide so we know the extent of the impact of the organization. And we have to be able to understand whether or not an endpoint was compromised. Right? When you look at the steps for incident handling, and you get to, you move from containment to eradication, the most important part at the end of eradication is being able to demonstrate we got 100% of this. And for a lot of these exploits, unless you have some way to identify its memory profile as it's running, and then to demonstrate that that memory profile doesn't exist on any other machine, you can't do that. You can point to artifacts of that exploit and say, well, we don't see these ports open on all of our machines. Okay, that's great. That's good. That's helpful, but that's not proof, right? That exploit could be sitting there in a dormant state and hasn't triggered yet. You want to be able to go and know, yes, this exploit did run on these machines or did not run on these machines, and you have to be able to demonstrate a negative. Otherwise, you can't really sit there in full confidence and know that eradication has been complete. Organizations need to collect, process, and store a plethora of data sources, including asset data, identity information, network traffic, net flow, endpoint forensic information, etc. And this data volume is part of what transforms yesterday's security analysis in today's big data security analytics. That's a lot of data to process. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Right? There's a lot of data. When you start capturing full packets and you start analyzing all of your logs and you start putting that all together, it is a lot of data. But there are ways to approach management of that data, and there are systems out there that can help you manage that. Hadoop is a great example of running against large data sets. And that can help you give visibility into large data volumes. So what we propose is an intelligence-driven architecture. that focuses on these aspects of visibility, brings that real-time data enrichment, puts it into analysis. That detection is informed by live data feeds that are coming from multiple sources, so that you can understand, or more importantly, the automated system understands what's happening in the environment today and things to look for on that data set to minimize the amount of time that you have to spend manually analyzing it. And then that goes into your security operations model, whatever it is. This is what we think it looks like, that this is the new model for security operations management. But we also have to recognize that all of that data needs to be archived. There's a difference between the data that's valuable in the moment and the data that you want to retain for archival purposes, for possibly forensic purposes in the future, or should you miss something that you can go back to. If the average dwell time that these exploits require is 3 to 4 days, and we agree that in order to manage to that, you need to get your response time down to between 1 and 2 days, then realistically, I don't need 30 days of live data, right? I need maybe 7 days, 14 days at the most, once the operation is humming. And then anything beyond that is an archival, right? Because we should be in a position that we don't need to look back 45 days and understand what happens. The power of this approach is how much it enables a single analyst to do their job. You know, I had said earlier about what our CrrCON model is, the 65 million events to 90 incidents, which basically means that the majority of those incidents that pop need to be evaluated in 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, that analyst has to decide this is or is not an incident that we need to respond to. Then they can spend up to an hour digging into that incident before they escalate it. So they kind of go through a two-stage process. At arm's length, is this bad? And if I think it's bad at arm's length, then I'm going to spend up to an hour to validate it. And then after that hour, I either have to kill it or I have to send it over to a stage 2 investigation. Hand it over to one of our hunters who's going to then dig into it, do a malware analysis on it, and run that. And they can spend up to about a day going through it. But that's the power of having all this information available to those tier 1 analysts. Because it paints a complete picture. And as I've been saying, this really goes beyond technology. There are great technologies out there that can really help you with this. But fundamentally, we've got to look at what is your overall cyber defense plan, right? How are you planning to conduct your incident handling? What is your overall strategy roadmap to move you down the maturity path? We want to get you up to that next-gen SOC design and implementation. What does it mean to be driving a security intelligence team as opposed to a security operations team? So those steps, just the initial planning and thinking through what you want to accomplish and understanding who within your organization would you have to work with in order to enable a plan like this. Understanding the type of transformation that we're talking about. But the biggest challenge of all is really the staffing of this. We can put great technology in place. We can implement some great processes, but we've got to have the people that are operating it. And you know, it's great to see everyone here at GrrCON, and these are the type of people that we're talking about. But it necessarily has to move beyond just drawing from the pool of computer experts. We have to think a little bit outside the box. And fundamentally, what is it that we want out of a security analyst? Puzzle solving, troubleshooting. We want someone that has a mindset to say, this doesn't look quite right. I need to figure out what's broken and where are the missing pieces. We can train them up on the fundamentals of networking or Windows system administration. Those are easy. That's cut and dry. But if they don't have that puzzle solver mentality, they're never going to be successful with it. You know, the thing that makes hackers amazing people is the fact that they can visualize and think and move beyond the original form of whatever it is that they're looking at. And they can try to do something else with it. One of the best successes we had in our own CERC was we hired a diesel mechanic as a tier 1 analyst. Other than using Internet Explorer, he didn't know much about computers. But he knew he could visualize an entire engine in his head. And when he heard something in that engine, based on its sound, he knew where it was malfunctioning and what part of the engine was probably malfunctioning, and therefore how to go and get it and fix it. And I'm happy to say that after 2 years, he's becoming one of our hunters. He's moving up to a tier 2 role because he really understands the objective that they're trying to achieve. Now, yes, it did require us to train him. But that's the fundamental outlook that we want to see in our analysts, more so than 10 years of Cisco networking experience. So one of the things that we did at RSA is we put together a security operations module or model that reflects what we do in our own CERC. And then we asked ourselves, what skill sets are necessary in each of those positions? Because we know those people aren't going to be in those positions forever, right? They are either going to advance up through promotion, or they're going to advance out to other opportunities. And we want to see people succeeding in this industry. So we certainly can't have an old school corporate mindset that we want to hold them back and we never want to train these individuals, right? So out of necessity, we said, we've got to be able to provide the right skills, not just the computer skills, but the analysis skills necessary to do this. And that's the thing that you need to think about in your own staffing model. When you look at the positions that you occupy, what is your plan for turnover? What is your plan for when those champions that you have in those roles that have been with the company for maybe 10 years finally decide to leave, right? How do we move away from the hero-based model of security and IT and get to something that is more steady, more reliable? So we broke down into 3 tiers, so level 1, level 2, level 3, and understanding the types of skills they need, from base intelligence-driven analysis to incident handling and response and understanding the full process, not just standing in front of the console and going through the steps that we're reinforcing with our tool, but then also understanding threat intelligence. What does it mean to conduct good threat intelligence? What are the skills necessary there? And then moving up finally to malware analysis and getting into the deep part of it, and then being able to understand how all that comes together. So our cyber defense workshop is actually about having the whole team work together, doing mock incidents and handling that in a controlled setting. So this is what enables our critical incident response team to continue to grow and operate. And these courses are all available to the public as well. So why are we doing this? Not just RSA, but we as security professionals. Why would we talk about shifting our approach to this intelligence-driven approach? The benefits are the top one right there, that we want to be able to detect and analyze before attacks impact the business. It's the business impact that we want to avoid. We know we're going to be breached, but let's at least stop them before they take anything. That we have complete capacity to investigate, prioritize, and remediate, and complete clarity on how to do so. That your team can grow and evolve, value working at your organization because of the opportunities that it provides. And those are opportunities that are not only going to allow them to succeed within your organization, but allow them as a career professional to move upward and onward outside the organization. So that's what we mean by intelligence-driven security, is changing the approach. Visibility, analysis, and action. Thank you very much. Now I'm open for questions. We've got some time for questions. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, please, by all means. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your con.